Welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space usually every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, but we're doing it this week, today and right now. And we always talk about developments in the world of UBI, and we meet with the people who are making these developments happen. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for unconditional or universal basic income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. I'm joined by my co-host, Conrad Shaw. Josh Worth won't be with us today. And we also have some special guests today, Peter Marks and Antonio Gisbert from the Oregon Rebate in Oregon. So we're excited to talk about what's going on there with that signature initiative. And that'll be a good conversation. And before we get to that, I'd also like to just mention that one of the things that one of the first projects that it's a foundation is funding is called Comingle. And whereas Josh would usually just a little intro about that, I'll do that today. Comingle is a money sharing app we're developing that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. The result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. You can learn all about it at comingle.us. And before we get to our guest today, I always like to just do a little roundup of recent news in the world of basic income, what's been happening in the past week or so. And I guess today, since we have two guests, I don't want to spend too long on news and kind of priming the conversation. We'll have plenty to talk about with the Oregon Rebate. But I do just want to mention something that was in the most recent news that came out in regards to another successful pilot. And this was from San Antonio, Texas. And this is a bit of a different pilot where 1,000 people got a $1,908 payment on December 2020. And then that was followed by 8 quarterly $400 payments between April 21st and January 2023. So there was 2 years of $400 every 3 months. And here's what happened from this one. Is that's pretty small, on average, that's a little over $100 per month, basically. And people would think, oh, that wouldn't really do that much. But as usual, the incomes from work went up. And this is so you can look at people's incomes just in general, and usually would think, oh, that includes the income that they're provided. This is income independent of that, and that went up. So again, usually what we see from these is people tend to just kind of find better jobs. They either go from part-time to full-time, or they just find better pay, or are able just to work more because they have access to transportation or something, and it's just something we commonly observe. So the biggest increased employment impact was observed in those with the lowest incomes to start, and the biggest educational investments occur in those with the highest incomes to start. So in this case, it was the lower incomes was below 50% of the poverty line, and the higher incomes were above 100% of the poverty line. This is kind of interesting how you can kind of see like the different impacts just even at that kind of that distance, like beneath or around like the poverty line. That if you just have like a little bit of extra stability, then if you're like just have like virtually hardly any income at all, then that really enables you to get income. And then if you already like have some amount of income and you're like right around the poverty line, then this just kind of boost in stability and income actually enables you to think, all right, well, maybe I can go back to school, maybe I can like start making some longer term plans. And so you kind of see like these more investments in future work, kind of like as your income goes up. Nearly 40% of participants said they spent more time with loved ones and became more involved with their communities. Many said the money was critical for the daily survival and allowed them to cover expenses they otherwise couldn't afford. And again, this is like a very small amount. For participants with families, many said their extra income went to enrolling their children in after school and extracurricular activities and supporting their educations. Here's one anecdote from it. It was Stephanie Hendon, 34, was living in a shelter with her 4 kids while working long hours. But within a year of the program, she secured a 3-bedroom apartment, purchased a new car, bought clothes for her children, and locked in a new job. One participant said, "I felt supported for the first time ever. I didn't know what it felt like before this." And a top recommendation for participants was that basic income should be monthly instead of quarterly, and that pilots should provide more opportunities for in-person connection with other participants and the community. So I'll post this in a reply. And I just thought this was really good to kind of prime the pump for our discussion, because, when it comes to the Oregon rebate, it's looking like $750 per year. And this is showing that, quarterly payments of $400. So, that's $1,600 in a year, made an impact. And again, like when it comes to this, most of these programs, and this is, I'm not for certain if this is the case, but usually most of these programs and these pilots are like one payment per household. So this was $1,600 per year per a household. Whereas if you're looking at like the Oregon rebate, what that's looking to do, that would be depending on the number of people in the household, $750 per person. So what Oregon's looking to do could actually be even more than this. And this had these, strong impacts, just as this was just, once every 3 months. And it's also in regards to, thinking about Comingle, Comingle would be aiming to do something like around a basic income floor of $50 a week, aka $200 a month. Again, something of that size could still be very impactful.
Yeah, there's something that was really interesting to watch and to see in the pilots we've read about, and the one that we witnessed for Bootstraps was it's so much more about the reliability, like that, the heartbeat of stability, than it is specifically the number. Because one of the things we thought when we set it up to be a 2-year pilot, rather than a 1-year pilot, was, well, we need to give people enough time to build up a little, bankroll before they start making moves and doing things. But people really, they were just waiting until they felt like they had that heartbeat of reliability they could trust. And that did not take long. There's something really magical that happens when people feel, there's some sort of steady ground to walk on. They'll walk it themselves.
Peter, Antonio, do you want to join on in now and just give some thoughts on like those results from San Antonio with such like a small amount in that pilot?
Yeah, thanks so much. This is Gisbert, everybody. I'm the Chief Petitioner of the Oregon Rebate. It's a pleasure to be here with a whole bunch of friends. Before I turn it over to Peter, I just want to say specifically to your prompt that, poverty is a super complex issue, as is like access to opportunity. And oftentimes we get that from folks. They're like, well, what is $750 going to do for me? And that really only comes from people who are actually like better off in the economic spectrum, right? When we think of poverty in culture, we not often think of like deep poverty, but in fact, there's a much broader group of folks who are experiencing what can be termed as edge poverty. Folks who live in and around the poverty line, which is way too low, right? And this is how the Oregon Rebate, or really this spot that you were describing, or what to some of us might seem as not a lot of money, has a huge potential to really lift a large number of people from a space of economic insecurity and like or edge poverty, whether you're on this side of the edge or that side of the edge. It sort of doesn't really matter, right? Like there's a famous statistic about about half of Americans not having $400 saved up in case of an emergency, right? So, just like a chunk of cash helps just about everybody. And if you're well off, maybe you make one extra mortgage payment a year, and that's going to save you a ton of money in the course of the mortgage of your house. And if you're not, then you use that money to do something else that really helps you and your family and your loved ones. So, the question of like how much is enough, it's a little bit like somebody who's hungry, like not giving them half a sandwich because they want the full sandwich. Like that'd be cruel, right? So
yeah, it reminds me of a study too, and I'll have to find the link to this. But I remember that that this was a study that found that just $1,000 of cash at the right moment would have made the difference between someone becoming homeless or not for at least 2 years. So, like, talk about like just how impactful this even $750 from the Oregon Rebate could be for someone in that situation where they're just like right on the edge, and that could save someone from years of homelessness, and just how expensive that homelessness can be for that community. Like oftentimes you're looking at some tens of thousands of dollars, be it shelter costs or jails or hospitals. Like it's crazy how much it can all end up being when it just could have been prevented with a really kind of shockingly small amount of money.
Hey, this is Peter Marks. I'm a
Peter.
co-founder. Hey, first of all, thank you so much for having Antonio and I on your show to speak about our ballot initiative. We feel like we're on something really special in Oregon with the Oregon Rebate. We don't really believe voters have had this like direct choice before of being able to choose between the status quo and taxing corporations and paying themselves. And I think it's just a really exciting experiment we're up to see what voters do with that choice. And Antonio and I, being in the field, we have a sense for the excitement that this has in people, like just the basic appeal of cash and this common understanding that corporations are not paying their fair share. Antonio touched on the the impact that this cash can have on people who are at that poverty line, and that certainly is a blind spot for well-off folks. And we believe that we can have huge impact on reducing poverty in Oregon with this. However, one story I like to tell that speaks to the wider impact of this policy across other kinds of income groups is a story about someone I went to college with. For those may be aware that there's a somewhat of similar policy in Alaska called the Alaska Permanent Fund that has a similar cash distribution method of a kind of similar amount per family. It's of course funded by resource extraction and not taxing corporations, but it's been around for 40 years in Alaska. And I went to college with someone from Alaska, and she said the only reason she was able to go to college, which is a private university, was her parents saved that every year. And we talk about $750 as a small, as a relatively modest amount compared to maybe, say, Andrew Yang's $1,000 a month plan. However, if you're a family of four, that's $3,000 a year. And if you save that every year for 20 years in a mutual fund with a 7% return, that's $100,000. This is potentially a huge amount of money for people who have the luxury of not having to spend it on today, what they can do that tomorrow. And I've seen that in my own life, and I think that's something really look forward to doing to change the conversation around ultimately who is this money best spent on, how can you best spend it, is the question we definitely want to be raising in this campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, since for everyone just joining us, just a reminder to take the time to just retweet the space, invite others to come in, and we are speaking with two of the people behind the Oregon Rebate, which would provide a universal rebate to everyone in Oregon of $750. And let's just go ahead and get into some of those details now too, just kind of the origins of this, and how things are going so far, some of the conversations that you've had, that kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Antonio, once again. I love to tell the story of how the Oregon Rebate came to being. It's this kind of like an amazing exercise in grassroots organizing. So about 5.5 years ago, I was meeting with some friends who were disillusioned by some recent electoral outcomes, and this thought crossed into my head, and I just kind of blurbed it out, and I said, wouldn't it be great if we taxed giant corporations and we gave people the money? And my good friend Lonnie turned to me and said, yeah, that sounds great, Antonio, you should do that. So fast forward to today. The next step was for me to assemble a group of a dozen of my good friends, all community organizers or amazing people, but just super grassroots folks, right? None of us is famous, right? And so we started meeting in coffee shops and wherever we could to sort of put some meat on this bone of this idea, right? And so in Oregon, we have a very robust direct democracy system process. Mm-hmm. And so we actually just legislated that. That process took about 8 months. The conversation was, in the group, participation ebb and flowed. Sometimes we had more folks, sometimes we have fewer folks, but generally it was about 12 of us, right? Super diverse group of folks, not just racially diverse, but also in terms of age. The youngest person was 17, the oldest person was 70. A bunch of different lived experience. We had some folks who were retired military. There was a political spectrum range from registered Republicans to communists in the room and everybody in between. 3 of the 12 folks were experiencing some degree of houselessness at the time. And some people with fancy degrees, some people with GEDs, sort of kind of like a pretty like cool cross-section of society, right? This was primarily in Eugene, Oregon, which is sort of rural Oregon, but also a little bit more left of center. It's a really interesting sort of part of the world. Lots of very dear friends there. The cool thing is that my role in this group was just to facilitate, and I just sort of took notes, and I would write what people expressed into what would be the full text of the petition or the law that we're trying to pass essentially through direct democracy. To me, it's amazing that if you assemble about a dozen folks who care about their communities and their friends and society in general, the outcome of that conversation happened to be something like UBI or the Oregon Rebate. And that I think is like really interesting, that we did not set out initially to do a UBI type of thing. But I think that's kind of an amazing thing. And I think that's something that in this space is important to keep in mind, is that when we give people the space to think about what would make their lives better, it is sometimes, not always necessarily, but sometimes they converge in this idea. So this idea is not like a particularly clever idea or a particularly insightful idea or a particularly like fancy idea. It's sort of common sense, right? I mean, to whatever problem you might have, if you have a little bit more cash, you're probably going to be able to manage that problem a little bit better, right? And like cash doesn't solve all the problems. We obviously know that, but not having any cash, we also know that does not help any problems.
Yeah.
So
one thing that I was I loved about this when I first heard about it was something that I've been wanting this whole time that I've been advocating for basic income since 2013 was even then I was excited about how Alaska had this annual dividend that averages from $1,000 to $2,000 per year that like even people there don't really think of as a basic income, even though it meets the requirements for a basic income during a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all without means test or work requirement. And what was like I was excited to like a state was finally going to be the second state to do this kind of universal dividend or rebate, whichever you want to call it. It's the cash payment to every single person in the state without means test or work requirement. And I was hoping that again, thanks to this kind of signature initiative process, the same process that got the basic income bill voted on in Switzerland, that caused such a a huge boost in knowledge of people knowing about and discussing basic income around the world with their signature initiative. I was hoping that with this could actually lead to more people talking about this and thinking about, hey, like our state should do something like this too. And you could see more and more states, especially those with signature initiative abilities, to get this in front of the ballot. So were you somewhat inspired by looking to our neighbor to the north of Alaska and thinking I like the way that they're doing that, and I think we can do that here in Oregon? Or were you even just like, hey, I just think that everyone here in Oregon should get a slice of these big companies and what they're the wealth that they're generating like in Oregon?
Yeah, just by happy chance, my friend Lonnie and his mother Linda, rest in peace, grew up in Alaska,
Mhm.
and so they advocated for just a direct cash payment and they talked about how they grew up in Section 8 housing, how, the Alaska Perm Fund dividend was winter clothes for the kids every year, and just basic necessities. And being a consensus model that we used to land on our concept, right? They were able to convince anybody that that was the right thing to do, and they did a beautiful job because it sort of makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
We also tried to.
Can we?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we also tried to learn. So we did a little bit of a deep dive in Alaska. I mean, not as deep as some of the folks here, so forgive me. But we tried to learn some lessons of what not to do or what we can do better.
Mhm.
So, for example, we intentionally chose to not create a giant pool of money because we thought that when you do that, you create an incentive for politicians and others to, like, every decade or so fight viciously over that giant pool of money. And so we try to learn that lesson. So all the new revenue that comes in to the state every year with the Oregon rebate, it goes back out in the form of rebates to the people of Oregon. So I think that's a good thing. Check.
I love that. I love that's sort of the things we're worried about as well too with Comingle is how do we get all the weird profit incentives out of everything. And a lot of times when we're going around talking about basic income ideas or whatever, a common response is from people who are up to the idea is that you need to have a giant wealth fund that it pays for things out of the interest and is invested. For me, that always raises a bunch of red flags. It's like, okay, what are we investing it in? Who's making the decisions? And then once it's an enormous pile of money, who's fighting over where it should actually go, in their opinion? And rather than just establishing a flow in the direction you want, and not worrying about growing this giant pool of money when common investor speak. I think of UBI as much more powerful as an idea of a cash flow situation than like an investment situation.
That makes a lot of sense to me, Conrad. Thank you.
I was wondering, we've been talking a little about direct democracy and signature initiatives. Not everyone knows how this works differently in different states and what's possible. Like I never grew up in a state where we could just put something on a referendum if we got enough people. Can you talk about how that works in Oregon and how and if you know like what other states have that ability and like what is the process of first getting it there to hopefully spread around the country like other initiatives have that came out of Oregon?
Yeah, thank you. Here in Oregon, we pride ourselves of being like sort of innovators or laboratories of democracy, particularly using the direct democracy system. But of course, other states will claim differently. The idea comes out of the progressive era, and it's sort of really quite elegant, right? Is you could, people come up with a legislative concept, and you need to submit some filings, make sure that it's not completely unconstitutional, et cetera, et cetera. You jump through those hurdles, and then you basically have to collect a set number of signatures. For us, it is 6% of the voters who voted for the last governor's race. In the last governor's race, it's about 117,000 signatures. You collect those signatures from registered voters, and then after you pass that threshold, whatever legislative concept you started off with appears in the next general election for the people to vote up or down, just simple yes or no. And that's really it. It is, quote, as easy as that, close quote. And of course, there are many intricacies and details along the way.
It's interesting how that's a percentage of the governor's race turnout. It feels kind of like it could be, we in general want like as high a turnout as possible. But if like some governor's race had like a massive turnout, then that could actually make it much more difficult the next time around for anyone to get a ballot passed. Like it would suck to be someone trying to get a ballot passed right after something like that.
Yeah, and at the same time, like there has to be some number between 0 and infinity, and constitutionally, that's the number that exists, and so we go with it. It's it's fine. I mean, there's it could be done 1,000 ways better, and it could be done 1,000 ways worse. So without going like super into the weeds, right? That's just the thing. And yeah, it did happen. The last governor's race in Oregon had a particularly big turnout. So we had to increase our goal number, and that was fine, you know. So
yeah,
it's okay.
So how do you get that many signatures? You said 100 and what thousand you have to get?
Yeah, 117.
Just knocking on doors.
Yeah, 117, and we're aiming for about 150,000. Just margin of errors because some signatures are like not accepted for various reasons. But yeah, it requires a village to do anything times 150,000. So what we have done is that we've built an infrastructure where we are hiring people in Oregon when we can to collect signatures, and knocking on doors is one way to do it, but it's kind of we find that it's slightly inefficient. It takes a long time, so we try to send people to events where Oregonians congregate, like the Cherry Blossom Festival last weekend was a particularly good event, for example. Yeah, your farmers market, whatever else, right? The line outside of the stadium before the game. Those kinds of events are like fantastic places to collect signatures.
Now, how many
St. Patrick's Day event?
So what are you up?
That's good.
So what are you up to, and how long do you have?
Yeah, thank you. So right now we have about 87,000 signatures, and we feel pretty good about that. We have until July 5 to get the other signatures, and of course the signature gathering is highly seasonal. So Oregon falls, winters, and early springs are particularly wet and soggy and cold. So nobody wants to stand around signing a piece of paper. We feel really good about our chances of getting the signatures for this cycle and appearing on the November 2024 general election.
Do you have the language of it all worked out already? What would appear on the ballot?
Yeah, that all gets worked out pretty much before any signatures get collected. So I feel like now I would like point you to our webpage, OregonRebate.org, and and then there are links for the full text of the petition and whatever else. But yeah, I mean, the voters on the pamphlet are going to see a statement of that somewhat neutrally describes the initiative, and then they'll have more information in the voters pamphlet to choose to vote yes or no. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very curious to hear just some of the stories that have been shared. Either personal stories that you're familiar with, stories that have been shared by people who been out here getting signatures. Just what kind of interactions have been going on with people as they hear about this, the potential to vote on this, and just what have they said? People being really excited about this, and even people who may have actually connected this to basic income, or maybe just people who have connected it to the Alaska dividend, or just people who are thinking, hey, this would be cool. I'm excited to vote for $750 per year, paid for by like the larger corporations, in Oregon. Like I'd love to hear some of those stories.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple that come to mind is that by and large, I think this is true for like polling on UBI nationally. Younger people uh, immediately understand the value of cash, and so maybe I'll just say that, but we see that all the time. Um, I also want to point out that we are not the Portland rebate, we are the Oregon rebate. So we have people collecting signatures all over the state, including in fairly conservative,
Oh, I'm
politically
sorry.
conservative.
I totally just realized that I put Portland in the comment in the topic instead of Oregon. My bad. Yeah, that was a mistake on my part. Sorry.
Oh wow. Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't even see your comment, so that's a coincidence. But
I'm just gonna see if I can edit that now.
but my right. So when we go to more politically conservative parts of the state, and Oregon is like many states, like Illinois, right? Illinois has its blue Chicago dot, and then everything else downstate. Similar Texas with Austin, and for Portland is for Oregon is kind of like that, but it's Portland, and then pretty much everywhere else. So something that we get all the time when we're uh, in a more conservative, politically conservative areas is that we have this like we find this pretty significant gender uh, gap, and this is not this is anecdotal evidence that I feel is that it's compelling enough to share. So forgive me, but so mom and dad, a couple of kids will be walking around. We'll ask them for their signature, and and the mom person in the group tends to immediately reach for a clipboard and sign, right? And that's sort of like that's aligned with this like sort of like gender reality of the moms in our society, sort of sitting around the kitchen table, figuring out how to pay the bills at the end of every month, right? Regardless of how you feel about uh, the Second Amendment or women's right to choose, at the end of the day, you got to pay your bills, and somebody has to do that, and that pressure is felt equally across the political spectrum.
Yeah, that's
So,
also one of the important differences between the kind of the typical way that cash is provided even to households as a whole versus, individually to each member of the household. That's very pro women, to be able to have that individuality versus the entire household. It's like a detail that people underestimate the impact of.
yeah,
It's also a detail. Yeah, a lot of the pilots going
Yeah.
on are geared towards households, and it's just like how can everyone be sort of nonchalantly missing this? And a lot of these are put together by people who are very left-leaning or identify as progressive, and yet cash to the household, it just kind of gets right past their red flag detector. Uh, yeah, you got to get money to every individual adult because a human being is a human being, and you can't always be safe in your own household if someone else has control over the money.
yeah, that's exactly right. And then the third anecdote. This is a conversation that I had with a couple years back with a newspaper reporter who was like like flat out oppositional, right? Uh, um, and so I had this like phone interview a couple years back, and this person was just like asking me all these tough questions and just grilling me about like all the problems that if we just alleviate a bit of poverty and if we just give people a little bit of like economic security, how all these like bad things are going to happen, right? Whatever.
Mhm.
So I was trying to get out of the conversation, it wasn't going very well. And so like the old trick in organizing, right, is that whenever you like just turn the conversation around by asking an open-ended question. So out of exasperation, I just said to the interviewer, I asked him to hold on a second, and I said, okay, what would you do with $750? And to his credit, this reporter stopped, thought about it for a second, and then started to tell me all about how what he would do is that he would fix his teeth. At the time we were on the phone, and so I didn't really understand what he said. So I asked more, and apparently this reporter every needs to do some orthodontic work, and so every year goes and gets 1 or 2 teeth fixed.
Mm.
But if he had $750, he said that he would be able to just go once, fix all his teeth at once, the remaining ones that needed fixing, and then be much better off. And it'd be like a huge relief for him. And I was just flabbergasted because out of all the everything that we come across, right, in terms of reducing poverty and all this other stuff, we seldomly get to such a like hyper personal, like and just moving example as that. And so I said to the reporter, okay, well, stop asking me questions. Do you have your story? What you said? I said, write that, you know, Oregon Rebate, great for teeth, right? And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're very much a people-centered campaign, right? Regular people conceived of and put together the Oregon Rebate. Regular people are doing the work of going out and collecting signatures. Regular people are going to go and vote, and regular people are going to then get the cash, right? So we're super people-centered, and I think that it's just so important to always go back to that, right? There's no way I would have thought of like the cost of orthodontic care the same way this person was thinking about it, and I thought that that anecdote is to me is just beautiful because it really reflects how even this person who was like antagonistic to the concept, once we empower them to think of the power of cash in their life, they kind of turn around, and so that almost brings tears to my eyes, to be honest.
Yeah, it's so powerful to be
Yeah,
able to, ask someone, what would you do? And again, that was really, I would say, central to the signature initiative in Switzerland. That was they even printed out like the Guinness Book of World Records, breaking largest sign that people who, if you look this up, you can see this enormous banner that people were like walking over, and it's just so big that like people kind of look like ants, on this huge sign that I believe it's like, what would you do if your basic needs were taken care of, or something along those lines. Can't remember exactly the wording of that sign, but it's really along those lines. What would you do? And it's really getting people to think about what they themselves would do is such an excellent way of getting people to think about, the value of this money. And I like to even point out that that's like the true definition of a basic income, where, I can say the actual definition, but really like the true definition is personal, where you think, what is it? What is it that I would do with this? What is it that I'm not doing because I don't have this? And being able to visualize what it is that you would do, how that would transform your own life, really gets people, I think, thinking about it differently. Because if they don't think about it in that way, there's kind of default to what would other people do. And when you ask what would other people do, then of course you just get all this, people would use it on drugs, people would not work, they'd stop working, all these horrible things. What would you do? Oh, I would do this great thing and it would be great. And but I'm special. Other people would make terrible decisions.
Yeah. we actually had sort of like a version of that, where early on in the docuseries we were doing some vox pop, just that's people on the street interviews, and we'd always ask the questions in that order. Like, this was back in 2016, so we first had to describe the idea of UBI because no one had heard of it. And then we'd say, so what do you think of the idea? And it was about 50% of people said, oh, that sounds really interesting, or a really great idea, and 50% said, oh, it's terrible, people are going to blow it, and people are going to use it on all this crap that is a waste. And then the next question we'd ask is, what would you do with it? And like 99.9%, except for like the practical jokers, had this great answer. It didn't matter if it was like I would give more to, I give more to Kickstarters, or I would, pay off my loans faster, or I would join a gym, or whatever. They were all things that, one, I believed in them, and two, would be a great boon to society. Even like I would go out to eat at local restaurants sometimes with the kids. These are all things that are good for all of us to have money flowing in society. And there was this stark dichotomy between what people thought of themselves and what they thought of others. I think one of the things we're really dealing with as an issue here in messaging is the othering that happens when we're so isolated from each other, when we don't really understand each other. And it was very interesting to see how quickly people's thought processes turned when you took the focus onto them. So that's one of the most powerful things you can do. And I like when you're out there, once you get all your signatures and you're out there trying to get people now to vote for it, that's a good thing to keep in mind, is getting people out of their headspace of thinking of others and get them into the headspace of, what would it mean for you? What would it have meant if you had had this through some hard times in your life? What will it mean in the future? What if your parents had had it? Like, making it personal is where people sort of have to start before they can really understand the power of UBI.
Let's talk a little bit about just some of the even the pushback that you're hearing so far too. Like you did mention, you're just talking about one person, and they actually had a great anecdote of what they would do with it. But in general, what are people saying from the, I don't think this is a good idea, as far as probably the funding? Like, I'm sure they have problems with, the fact that this is a tax on, corporations, and I'm sure there's probably some misinformation out there already, possibly about, this is going to go, this is going to hurt small businesses, even though it's not taxing small businesses. Like, I don't know, what kind of stuff are you hearing along those lines so far?
Yeah, thank you. So it is true that there are some folks that they tag the revenue side of the equation, because we're a statewide ballot initiative, right? So the state of Oregon cannot print money unlike the federal government. So we have to come up with the money somehow. So the revenue side for the Oregon rebate is a 3% increase in the state minimum corporate tax after $25 million of in-state revenue. It doesn't matter where the corporation is based. They can be Oregon-based or based anywhere else in the world. And this idea sort of lines up well with this like global trend towards trying to change corporate taxation from the where the alleged profit center might be, but where the economic activity happens, right? So just by weird coincidence, we happen to align with that, which is great, whatever. But yeah, so right now, the minimum corporate tax rate after $25 million in Oregon is about 0.1%. Most people are shocked by that because the personal income tax in Oregon is between 5 and 10%. So that just feels inherently unfair. And the Oregon rebate raises the corporate tax burden for corporations in Oregon, for these big corporations in Oregon, from what it is now, which is the lowest or the second lowest in the 50 states, to about like next to Nevada, right? So, it's still reasonable.
Right. So it's really interesting that this is a tax that already exists. So I'm sure a lot of people maybe don't even know the tax exists, or they certainly don't know the amount. And then the fact that this is really small compared to the rest of the states, and then the fact that you could raise this and it wouldn't be like, some absurd amount compared to the other states. It would just put you towards the top, but it's still not like some extreme amount. Like nothing about this is unrealistic or unheard of on a state basis.
Well, would it put you towards the top? Where is Nevada in the ranking? Like,
It changes every year, and it's a little bit not super clear. But the last time I did the math, it was 17th. So, if you will, like middle top tier of state tax burdens. There's still room to go up if somebody ever wanted to afterwards.
Mm.
But in any case, right? Like you don't think of Nevada as a particularly anti-tax state, right? So it's fine. But yet, some folks are just like adamantly opposed to anything that rhymes with tax or tax increase or corporate tax increase. So those folks are sort of nominally a no, and yet, how many libertarians do we know who refuse to cash their stimulus pandemic checks, right? So that's supposed to be a joke.
Yeah.
Sorry for lack of inflection, but the answer is none. So it's important to keep in mind that like there's a gap between what people say and what people do, and that's not that's not a diss on folks. It's just like a reality of we are complex human beings and we contain multitudes.
On the subject of getting around hangups around taxation, yeah, it's a tax on corporations. This is at a moment when corporate profits are at all-time record highs, but it's also a tax cut to individuals at a time when, yeah, inflation's been tamed. It's at a more reasonable rate, but people are still feeling the effects of higher prices. And most people will experience the Oregon Rebate as a tax credit. And that's one of the things I think is so unifying potentially around basic income is that conservatives can look at this as a tax cut, and it will be for the vast majority of people. You could also look at it as a benefit that, of course, more left or liberal people like. And having that conversation around how do these taxes actually impact you? The vast majority of Oregonians, even if say corporations passed on this 2% difference in taxes directly into prices of goods, you have to make so much money, $500,000 a year or something like that, in order to really feel the effect of this on the other end. So like it's 99% of people will benefit from this directly, economically. And San Antonio's point around what it would do to the corporations and businesses in the state of Oregon, this only applies to corporations making over $25 million a year in in-state revenue. So this is not going to impact small businesses. Additionally, having actually giving people spending power and we're talking about potentially tens of millions of dollars into some rural communities in Oregon, have a dramatic impact on some of these local economies and some of the small businesses that are run in those parts of the state. As Antonio alluded to, yeah, there is a bit of a transfer effect from the urban centers to rural parts of the state where this money just goes further.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point, I feel. Like that's something that definitely people need to, I think, consider better just in general, especially conservatives, where, yeah, like any basic income, any statewide dividend, anything like that is going to go further in rural areas and do so much more for rural areas. Like I like to point out that, if you're looking for any kind of policy that will, really positively transform, Main Street USA in rural areas and like restore, these economies that have just dried up. It's, basic income in the case of Oregon, even this $750 rebate, like you said, just goes so much further in rural areas. Is that something that people, pick up on, even like once you mention it? Are there conservatives that have come around that you've heard and like, oh, right, like, yeah, that's a good point you make, that this is effectively a tax rebate for especially people in rural areas with the lower incomes, middle classes, that this is something that conservatives can get behind as a conservative policy. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I think that people are getting there, and we are sort of on different ends of the same elephant at times. So I'll give you a quick example. So I remember about 15 years ago, people were protesting Walmart, and how Walmart was decimating main streets. And we don't really talk much about Walmart decimating main streets anymore, because now it's like the dollar stores that are decimating whatever's left of Main Street after Walmart leaves, because they've extracted all the wealth from the community, right? And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, some folks in a very conservative, politically conservative part of the state organized a protest against in the zoning meeting to prevent one of these dollar stores to move into their downtown, because they recognized that it was just going to be the end of their town. And so, we have these statistics of it's very easy to do. I'm embarrassed calling it a statistic, but like you can figure out how many people live in a town or in a community or in a city, and then you multiply that by $750, and then that pretty much gives you like the local economic impact of the Oregon Rebate. And so people get that, right? And so like your local mom and pop shop, your local coffee shop, it's not selling $68,000 worth of coffee every day, right? But Starbucks statewide certainly is, right? So what we want to do is like we want to have Starbucks have to pay their fair share in taxes, so that I and my neighbors can walk down to Cafe 11 and have another cup of coffee, or another scone or whatever it is, right? And people get that. A couple of years back, I was talking to the mayor of a town that remain unnamed to preserve their innocence, and I mentioned that the local economic impact in the city that they're the mayor of would be about $126 million a year. And if you're a mayor, and somebody mentions bringing $126 million to your community, that's impressive, right? Like that, you listen.
Right, like if you were pitching a $126 million, business, like, oh, we're going to create this many jobs, and so that many jobs, there's going to be spending money in your community, and they'd be like, they would jump on that. And yeah, so it's just kind of crazy how any mayor would look at a gift horse like that and be like, no, I don't want that money in my community.
Exactly, right. So this is point about going as close to the people as we can, right? Like we trust people to design the Oregon Rebate. We trust people to get on the ballot. We trust people to vote yes. We trust people to get the money, and then we trust people to use the money as they best see fit for themselves and their families. And so similarly, talking to mayors, city councils, and county electeds, we have found to be generally easier than talking to to electeds at higher office, like statewide. And I think it has to do with like just being closer to the people, right? And so I think that Conrad's point about something like this just being excellent at recycling money is really important, right? Like this money is going to get exchanged between like my hand and the coffee shop owner or the pizza shop owner down the street, and like we care deeply about having that vibrant economic life,
Yeah, that money will go to the coffee shop. The coffee shop will pay the the person making the coffee, the barista. Then that barista will spend the money locally, and then that'll become someone else's wage. Like, yeah, like this is it's funny how anyone can look at that any kind of basic income or dividend or anything like this, and not see the multiplying ramifications of the local economy and how this will fuel businesses. Like, if anyone who believes that that small businesses are the core of the American economy should be for those businesses having customers with some extra money to spend. Like, that's a great thing for small businesses.
Seems like a good time for a time check. Peter had to leave at the hour. This is usually when we open it up to people to start asking questions and joining the conversation. So anyone listening, you can request to speak, ask Antonio something. There's a lot of fun political strategy stuff going on here. So I'm curious, Antonio, what are the so you get the signatures, and then what's next? What do you see coming down the pike? What are all the steps to get through to election day?
Yeah, thank you. So we get the signatures, we turn them in, and then I take a week off, and not just myself, but myself and a bunch of people. Then we get ready for the general election, which it's like the November general election, when we'll probably have to vote between, for president and everything else. So it's like that big election. In among all that stuff, there's going to be like a little bubble at the bottom for Oregon Rebate. And so we just have to get 50% plus one yes votes. And there's various ways of going about this, right? I mean, it's a general election, so the sky's the limit. If we had $20 million and we want to spend $20 million, we easily could. And if we don't have $20 million, then we won't spend $20 million, and we'll do the best we can. I forget who mentioned this, but to the degree I think that we invite folks to sort of put politics aside and labels aside, and really reflect on what's going to be better for themselves and their family, then I think that's kind of where we're going to be more successful. And yeah, I mean, like, could you use $750? What does $750? What would $750 for every member of your household mean to you, right?
I think it's so.
I think that. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I think it's so useful, as far as like talking about this in a nonpartisan way and really reaching out to people, about this idea of being entirely cross-partisan. I would just think it's really valuable that you could just point to Alaska, and you could just be like, yeah, we think that the Republicans in Alaska have done a really good effective policy that for the past 40 plus years, and then it's about time another state does this. Have you seen any kind of reactions to that, where you can where you made that message, or some signature gatherer has, and these like a conservative has come around and thought, oh yeah, Alaska, or maybe even someone who moved from Alaska to Oregon, and they're like, yeah, I used to live there, it was great, I'd like to see that here too.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, there's nothing like the lived experience. And so if somebody has lived in Alaska, then they know, right? Or, I mean, I fantasize about this thing of having people reach out to friends and family that they have in Alaska and ask them about it, right? Mm-hmm. That would be extremely powerful. Maybe we can get a phone bank delegation from Alaska to Portland around the time of the election. That would be super fun, right? Just people being like, "Are you crazy?"
I feel like that could be a fun commercial too. If we just interviews with people from Alaska saying, "How do you like your dividend?" And just a whole bunch of Republicans and independents and everyone saying "Oh yeah, it's great.
Right. Yeah, that would be fantastic for sure. It would be. I'm sure that could be done. That seems not a stretch to ask Alaskans how they feel about their current fund dividend, which is like highly popular. Yeah.
Right. What with the way it appears on the ballot being like a little bubble at the bottom, like you said, and 50 plus one yes votes is what you need. That gave me two technical questions. One, um, does uh, does it help to have it just to be a little addendum so people are like are more likely to just kind of click yes because it seems like good at first glance rather than having it be the whole election? And also, does 50 plus one yes votes essentially mean someone not voting on it is a no?
Uh, the second question, no, it's 50% plus one of cast ballots for it. So,
Okay.
and the first question is one that when I had more free time, I would think about it a bit, but now I have stopped doing that. And I don't really know that there's a way to really like figure that out or guess that, right? You could see it going either way. At the end of the day, when we're successful, or we'll tell the story about how clever we were because we happen to have chosen to do it this way, and this way was the better way. Um, but but really, we're kind of operating from a from a place of sort of like moral urgency, where we really want to get this. We feel that if we can. Um, so some early research from the UBI Center, who I'm sure everybody here is friends with,
Mhm.
suggests that the Oregon Rebate will reduce overall poverty, has the potential to reduce overall poverty by about 15% in Oregon, and child poverty specifically by about 26%. This is early stats from like a few years back.
Mhm.
It's probably changed, but maybe not that much. When we came across that, it was just kind of shocking, and it, there's a moral urgency to reduce child poverty by 26% today, if not yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And so if some super smart consultant were to tell me, look, Antonio, it's better for you to try to do this on a non-presidential election cycle, I might say, gee, can we try to do it now, because this is the next opportunity, and it would be hard to justify morally delaying this harm reduction by 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. We're just trying to do the best we can at the time, and it's going to be a pretty banana selection, right? But we'll do the best we can.
I'm personally
Yeah.
just a fan of the larger mandate. Like I know that there's a whole strategic, even organizations that can be paid to help with the strategy behind ballot initiatives, and they'll do the research and they'll look at the specific proposal and they'll say like, oh no, I think you should do this during this election, and because it has a tiny turnout, versus like the largest possible turnout. But when it comes to something like this, like maybe it strategically could be better to have a smaller turnout. But I just think it's so much more powerful to be able to have a large turnout and say, look, this is what the people of Oregon voted for, and this is a majority said this. This is a strong majority. This is not like just a simple majority of a small minority of people. Like this is it's a mandate.
Yeah, for sure. If I think that political political folks will also think that general election, at least in Oregon, has more of a Democratic Party turnout, and so if you believe that, well, that seems to be a fact, and then if you believe that, generally speaking, UBI right now leans a little bit more left than right, then that might be a help.
Do you happen to know what other potential ballot initiatives will be alongside the rebate potentially that could also, help, ramp up excitement?
Yeah, so this is breaking news in Oregon. As of 2 weeks ago, the ballot initiative space was going to be extremely chaotic, but through the power of deal making, it seems that by and large, a lot of that chaos has died down. So there's a small chance that we're the only ballot initiative
Oh, wow.
on the uh, ballot this cycle, which is maybe good, maybe bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it all.
Yeah, and that's the spirit. That's the spirit I was asking the question in too. Is not like, would there be a strategic time to do it at another time? I'm very in line with the moral urgency. It's just like just a more of a curiosity of if it's the main thing to people, and when people focus on it harder, are they less or more likely to vote for it? But yeah, just in terms of understanding like what you're up against, like, and I liked how you put it, Antonio. Once we pass this, we'll look back and talk about how clever we were for doing it the way that worked. It reminds me of the stock traders or money managers who like years later are like, see, I was right during, but they're no different than the other ones who didn't guess right. Like they're all just sort of using the fact of success to describe how clever they are. Like, and then you assume that they're going to read the market again every time, and that's how they sort of advertise themselves. Next time around, they're wrong. There's a lot of speculation when you're dealing with anything which is sort of trying to react to and measure the emotions of a large population in aggregate. It's a very hard thing to predict.
I'm curious about, what kind of potential, the money that will be spent against such an initiative, once it's for sure going to be on the ballot, and it's companies who will see increased taxes, see the potential for this, or even people who have nothing to do with this. Like I can see the same people involved in the bans on the bills to ban basic income pilots in 7 states so far. They are just purely against any kind of cash provided without work requirements. So I can see them spending money in the state to try to turn people against this. And I'm curious if you're seeing any of this, yet, or if people are like, I don't, there's no point in this yet because it's not going to be on the ballot for sure. And also, I wonder too if we'll see something kind of similar to like how we saw with when like a big bill gets passed in Congress, and you've got a bunch of people against it, and like, no, this is terrible, this is going to do all kinds of harm, and blah blah blah, and then it gets passed, and then those same people tell their own constituents that like, oh, like we're spending here, and you're welcome, it's great. I wonder if you'll potentially could see the same thing in Oregon, where like a company is against it, and then it passes, and then they kind of spin this in a like, you're welcome, how we're a good company that we're paying our taxes and we're giving that money right back to the people of Oregon, and they kind of like spin that into a very positive thing, even though they were against it. Just wondering if something like that could happen.
Yeah, I love that thought experiment, and it reminds me a little bit of that old joke about if we just open the prison doors, all the crooks will go inside, right? Um, I do not know, and I mean it's really hard to say. I think that uh, you can imagine that uh, the business lobby, broadly defined, and not and specifically not like local business lobby, but more like mega corporate business lobby, probably going to be not super supportive of the Oregon rebate because of greed or whatever, right? And so I kind of get it that if you run Comcast, you sort of might not want to pay more 0.1% tax in Oregon because, somebody negotiated a deal for you, 35 years ago. And like, I get that. But I'm not sure that like the average Oregon voter, right, is really going to buy that, right? And so this is not I think that we do well or we do better when we talk directly with folks, right? And so like a to ban a preemptive ban on anything UBI is that sort of occupies the space of sort of our intellect, right? I mean, we can sort of think about the pros and cons of that and whatnot, but we're not really doing that. We're just saying, hey, could you use $750? If so, vote yes. If no, whatever. And I think that's different, and I think that it's going to be harder for corporations or people opposed to say you don't deserve that money because of some fine, pick a reason, or you should not get the $750 or this rebate because your neighbor might get this rebate and they might do something that you disapprove of with that money, right?
I think.
And so to the degree that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just thinking that that the main opposing argument at this point when it comes to any kind of cash without conditions is especially in post 2020 with like all of these pilots going on is beforehand it's people will stop working and they'll be lazy, and of course like all these pilots are disproving that, and that's not the case at all. Work requirements can actually be counterproductive, and oftentimes work increases as a result of unconditional cash. And so as a result of, I think, that, and also just pandemic, it's all inflation. You can't give, you can give some people money, but if you give everybody money, then it's pointless because it'll just be inflated away. Businesses will raise their prices, and all that nonsense. So I do wonder if that will also be what you observe too there in Oregon, where it's not so much about, if you do this, people get lazy or work less. It's that, and also companies, saying this as the main kind of fear mongering premise is, this will just raise prices. We'll have to raise prices. We won't, we'll have less money to invest, in stuff. You'd have like you said, Comcast. Comcast would say something like, we were going to like update and invest in this infrastructure that was going to make our services better, but now that we're taxed more, we're not going to do that. So you'll get $750, but you'll have worse service now, and you'll just have these just people fear mongering that you'll just have all sorts of prices increase and or degradation of service in exchange for this. I just kind of think that that's probably going to be the main argument that, say, like a commercial would say, or just people writing some anti rebate op-ed would say.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like the basic sort of corporate playbook, right? Where if you tax corporations, the sky is going to fall, and like we're all going to die. But the data speaks otherwise, right? I mean, and tons of folks have been doing amazing research on the impacts of the Alaska preferred dividend on employment, and like there's no decrease in employment. So we have reams of data, right, to suggest that direct cash transfers are a phenomenal social policy that promotes justice and equity. I think that all that conversation, I think, is really important, and I personally stand on the shoulders of the giants who had those early conversations, and who are like you all who are having those conversations now. But my work now is really sort of focused on talking to somebody on the street, right? I'm holding a clipboard. For example, the other day, somebody asked about inflation. Isn't this going to lead to inflation? And I was like, no. And so then I thought of, it's like, okay, how do you talk to somebody about this? And, it's a long day. So, this is not maybe the tightest argument, but perhaps somebody here has some feedback on it. So this is why I offer it in the spirit of conversation. So I said, hold on a second. If I give Comcast $750, does that cause inflation? No. But if Comcast gives me $750, why does that cause inflation? And and it was just kind of like a different way of looking at it. And so it was like, oh, okay, I get it, sure.
Well, the kind of thing that I would say, again, because it's just so nice to be able to point to Alaska. It's something so similar when the amount in Alaska, is say, $1,500, and you're talking about $750. You can really point to that. And I just point all the time to the fact that in Alaska, every time the dividend goes out, you just see dividend sales all over the place. Like Alaska just has all sorts of discounts, and you have all these businesses lowering their prices in order to attract people with this, money burning holes in their pockets in hopes to, competing over that money. I think that's such a great example to potentially use where, I fully expect the same kind of thing in Oregon if that were to pass, where whenever, I don't know, do you happen to know like when the rebate would be issued? Is this like something at the end of the year or something like that? And wherever it happened, I would expect that same kind of thing, just sales all over the place.
Yeah, the dividend sales is a great example. And we expect that most people will claim the rebate while they file their taxes, but you do not have to wait until April. So probably like February, March will be when people's rebates will get to them.
Okay.
So early in the year.
Right.
Yeah, and the dividend sales is a great example. Yeah, I've heard about that as well.
Yeah, you can also point to, again, it's something I commonly point to in regards to Alaska, where, the dividends started going out in 1982. And if you look at the CPI growth as a measure of inflation in Alaska, and then compare that to the rest of the country, then prior to the dividend going out, the rate of inflation in Alaska was higher than the rest of the U.S., and then post 1982, the rate of inflation growth was slower than the rest of the U.S. And I don't know if that's the similar kind of thing that would be expected in Oregon, but I do know that this idea that this money will certainly cause inflation growth is absolutely disproven by Alaska. You see the opposite of that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic statistic. I appreciate that.
Another question I'm curious about is I'd just like to hear some about the people actually out there gathering the signatures. What do you you said that kind of young people really see the value of this more readily than others. Do you see a lot of young people being the ones to gather the signatures? Even again, what kind of stories, even not necessarily that they heard, but what are the stories of the actual signature gatherers?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm also a signature gatherer, but I wish I had some of them here as well to talk to you about their experiences. We it's pretty hard work to collect signatures well, and so while a lot of our petitioners are younger, that's not necessarily the case. We have plenty of older folks. Um, I think today I was onboarding a couple of folks. One of them was born in the 50s, so you know. Um, but, but yeah, I think that by and large, there, and maybe this is just like the thing that sticks to me, is when we approach somebody on the street about the Oregon rebate, every so often you'll get, for lack of a better word, a hope response where somebody like really hears you and they're like, oh my God, this would be awesome.
Hmm.
And like you feel that they sort of stand a little taller and a little lighter. And so like we're sort of giving hope, right? A bit. And that I think is really rewarding. I don't think I know that's super rewarding, at least to me, and other people have said the same thing, because it's really, this is a job and it can be a slog at times. But at the end of the day, we're trying to make the world a better place, right? And so we are in that interface between where that work is getting done, and it is super super rewarding. So I think that many petition secretary would talk about that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That kind of what was that? Wasn't that one of like Obama's slogans? Was like the politics of hope, or is that even like the name of his book or something like that? It just sounds really familiar. Just that kind of that phrase, politics of hope. But just to think that just coming up to someone and discussing this idea could kind of like spark hope in their eyes. That's certainly something that we need more of around now. It's just people feeling a bit more hopeful instead of so down.
It's yeah. It's also something that came out of some messaging research that I was looking at recently, that you shared with me, Scott, actually. But it was the efficacy of different sorts of political argument, specifically for UBI. But the the fear of the bad can be a powerful motivator, but the anticipation of the good is a more powerful motivator generally in politics. Like if you turn people's focus onto what it could mean for them, what they could do with it, that and get people thinking optimistically and in terms of their own opportunity rather than like what's getting away from like the lines of thinking that lead to like those other people and what are they going to do wrong with it. It can be super powerful. I remember that about Obama's campaign as well. It was such a it just felt like a physical relief, like a breath of fresh air to have that sort of messaging, that sort of hope be the center of the campaign. And you can think what you want about Obama based on what happened, but comparing the way that feels to the way, it's felt for a long time, whatever comes out of the Democrats is like, look how much worse the other guys are. Like the only thing that matters is not having Trump because that's a nightmare
Yeah.
scenario. It's just not very inspiring, right? It just makes you want to check the fuck out.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that we really haven't seen just in the political short term. And I guess the short term for me and for all of us, but I also know that it's we're talking Obama ran in 2008 originally, so you're what are you looking at, like 16 years since then. And if you were I mean under 18 or something then, and you maybe didn't really think much about how different that is, but nowadays you might look back on that, and yeah, it's very different, and it feels like a short amount of time, but it's kind of a longer scale, and it's just kind of sad how I really missed that. Like you said, it was really nice. Whatever you want to say about Obama as president, that campaign was just really nice to see this. Let's hope for uh, a better future, and that change is
Right.
possible.
Hope and change. Now it's politics of outrage 100% of the time,
Yeah.
all day long. So thank you, Antonio, for bringing some politics of hope back into our life. Have you encountered anybody from other states starting to do similar things? Or are you still like a lone wolf in this sort of effort at this point?
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. We've had combos with a couple of folks in other states, but very preliminary. And I think that, and so it, um, and I think that it's been like big social change takes time, right? Whether it be marriage equality or cannabis decriminalization or death with dignity or whatever it might be. And so we think of ourselves as one little uh, movement in this ecosystem for justice, economic justice. I think that it'd be amazing to export the Oregon rebate to other states where there might be interest. Of course, we should walk before we run, so we're a little bit extremely busy with the task at hand. So forgive me, but one does like to think a little bit more nationally, right? And then that would be super exciting. The basic formula is one that can be replicated, right? About half the states in the U.S. have some sort of direct democracy uh, uh, capacity or system, and so and giant corporations are extremely undertaxed in all 50 states and across the world, and in all 50 states, people could use a hand up. So there's no reason why we cannot, once we're successful here, go to other states.
Yeah,
And it'd be fantastic.
it seems like most likely, potential next state, just the neighbor to the north, Washington State. That's another possibility. As someone who lived in Seattle for about a decade, I know it's all Washington and Oregon, Seattle, Portland. It's just there's a lot of connections there, and when one does one thing, the other can look at that. So I would think that certainly holds potential. I know that they're already looking at even kind of statewide funding of even basic income pilots of some kind. So it'd be interesting to see something like that. And it only takes one.
Yeah.
Like you were definitely the first. You're a pioneer out there. Alaska has certainly existed for a long time, but people don't even think about that, and they think about it in terms of oil. This will be the first state to get people to think about just a dividend in general through whatever tax mechanism. And just if it succeeds in Oregon, I would think that certainly opens the door for the next potential, say the midterms maybe could have one or two, or I know that kind of it takes time to ramp something up, so maybe it'd be more like the next election after that. But that could end up being something like 1 to 4 states or something looking to join Oregon in the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and just the idea of like watching how quickly after it passed, some of the fear mongering would prove to be, sort of baseless. Like, oh yeah, you're going to charge these companies more. They're just going to pack up their business and go to other states. It's like, well, they're just going to lose one market that they have if they like. They're not going to stop wanting to make money in Oregon because they pay a little more taxes on it. Like, they're going to continue chasing that market just like every other market that allows for a
Also
profit.
turns out that that's good for consumption, in the state. It's like, why would you as a company leave the state if there's more customers with more money to spend? Like maybe if you're a check cashing, payday loan kind of place, maybe you'll find that you're not doing as well in Oregon. But in general, I just feel that, you just have so many companies that they hem and haw before it's actually passed, but then afterwards they're like, oh, hey, look at that. People spending money. That's nice.
And even if they were making less in that state, they're not going to choose to make zero in that state. It might be that it's a better redistribution of the amount of taxes they should have been paying. It's just like, of course, they're going to argue against paying more to begin with, but it doesn't mean they're going to leave. It's not the same as the capital flight argument, which I'm a little dubious of as well when it comes to charging individuals higher income taxes, where they could move to a new country or offshore their funds. That's like a little harder to argue against because some amount of that will probably happen, and we need some sort of international cooperation. But Oregon is a place that has a market of money that people are going to compete for. That doesn't change when you change the tax rate a little bit. No one's going to leave.
Yeah, I wonder too if they'd actually see some corporations there in Oregon that would come out ahead of this. They would want to be seen as being ahead of the curve. They'd either personally think that this is a good idea, and so therefore they would endorse it, even though it would raise their taxes, or maybe they do some internal polling and they see that it's actually has a good potential to pass, in which case maybe it's in their best interest to come out ahead. But either way, I do think it'd be really interesting just to see which companies, if any, actually endorse this in advance and say, yeah, I know my taxes are going to go up, but I support this for the people of Oregon. Like we're a very pro people company, kind of like really lean into it and spin it that way.
It's also really smart politically to start with corporate tax. Like we talk about UBI being able to be funded by a lot of different things. And another thing that came out of that messaging, all those white papers I was looking at, was in terms of justice and fairness and what people support, like corporations aren't paying their fair share is like right up at the very top of something that everybody accepts. So it's different than saying we're going to raise income taxes or sales taxes or anything, even if, some of the corporate tax trickles down in terms to the consumer. It's still very different than saying we're going to raise tax rates and give money and give everyone a UBI, which is still justifiable, but it's harder. It's a lot harder to make, an easy claim or get people to accept than, these enormous rich mega corporations pay 0.5% in taxes, and if they paid a very ridiculously small percent, less quite as small, then you'd get a check every year. It's like, it seems like the sort of thing, if you're able to get the communication out on it well, and I guess that takes a certain amount of funding in today's reality. It would be hard, or it's a much easier case to pass for the first one. So that's one of the reasons I'm very excited about this initiative over just about anything else that's happening in the UBI space right now.
There's also a lot of anger from people just in general about corporations, with as far as sellers inflation, they're the ones seeing record profits. They're raising their prices more than they needed to as a result of higher prices on their inputs. Like there's definitely a lot of anger, increased anger, even beyond the polling that we'd seen, like say last year or the year before, in regards to taxing corporations. I think, like in this specific environment right now, it's probably even some percentage more popular to say, yes, tax the corporations. They're the ones, they've raised prices, they've seen record profits. This is wrong. We need to make them pay, and money should go to us.
Don't call it a record profits tax. Call it a price gouging tax.
Right.
But, yeah.
Have you seen anything about that, Antonio?
Yeah, I think that you all are like spot on this. On pricing, maybe this is a bit too much into the weeds, but keep in mind that like a rough approximation is that Oregon is about 1% of the U.S. economy. So, when Apple or Comcast have to pay a little bit more tax in the state of Oregon, they're not going to change the price of a cell phone in Oregon to quote unquote make up for that difference, right? I mean, it would cost them more to just make the flyers for it, right?
Right.
It's not, I think that we expect corporations to argue that because they've historically argued that against any kind of like meaningful taxation. But again, I do feel that this is, at the core, the corporate tax revenue side of the equation is it's not what we are doing. What we're doing is giving every Oregonian a cash rebate of about $750 every year, right? And like we should talk about that. We should talk about the power of that cash in your life, how transformative it can be, what you can do with it, and the hope that brings. We should not get in the weeds about whether 3% is the right level of corporate tax as opposed to 2.5 or 3.5, right? Like that's really important from a policy perspective. But policy folks are not the ones who vote for. I mean, policy folks do vote if they vote in Oregon, but that's not our primary audience, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that leaning on the how transformative this can be for yourself, regardless of how much wealth you may have. I think I think that's the path to victory.
Yeah.
Although I would make a case for 3.14 14159 tax rate because everybody likes pie. There might be some messaging possible there.
Some more messaging I think is possible. Is an inflation rebate, like that would have been interesting to see in like the wording of the bill, even though it's not like it's always going to be that way. But as far as like the timing of the messaging, I can see that being something that could perk some ears and people would be on board with, is instead of focusing on the tax to corporations side, and then it'd be, hey, this is an inflation rebate. This companies are doing better than ever, and you deserve to get a little bit of relief from this. And if people actually see this as a universal tax rebate in this time of higher inflation, then I would think that could even get some more people on board than during other times. Have you seen that, Antonio, as far as this kind of people thinking of it as a inflation rebate?
Not specifically. I think that inflation comes up a lot, and like I mentioned before, it's sort of like this problem. I think that people like there's a lot of talk in the news about inflation, and we see greedflation, and then we see shrinkflation as well, right? And so it's kind of like this like hot topic. but I'm not sure that people generally understand, nor do economists understand, what really causes inflation or what doesn't cause inflation.
Yeah, I don't mean as
Uh,
far as causing it. It's just like, let's say, like as part of this, it gets on the ballot, and you're a couple of months away. Part of the messaging would be looking at the difference in prices that people in Oregon are, annual average prices in 2024 versus,
mhm.
2023 even, or even further back, but just showing that, it turns out that the average increase in prices that people are paying more of on, basic goods like groceries, or even specifically, or groceries and some other stuff, is turns out that it's, $1,500, or whatever it ends up being, as the average that each Oregonian is paying extra than the previous year. And then you're talking about a $750 rebate, then you could say, hey, this is actually, half the difference. This is rebating. This is like a 50% tax decrease on that inflation increase. Like people could look at that and go, oh yeah, this is actually really helping me with the cost increases and the cost of living that I've experienced, in the past year.
Yeah, I really like that now. Like inflation relief. I think that maybe it was Conrad who used that word earlier today. Uh, yeah, um, something like that I think could easily work, right? Because if you've paid, say, $1,500, if we're if an individual's paying $1,500 more for their day-to-day stuff this year compared to before this inflationary bubble, then like you just kind of, it invites the question, well, where's that $1,500 going to? Like, did I get a raise of $1,500? I probably did not get that raise, right?
Mhm.
And so then that stands to reason that the money is just getting hoarded uh, by the corporations, and so getting some of that money back does kind of make sense. Yeah.
There's something else. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. Are you familiar with the Idaho's grocery tax credit? Is that correct?
I know a bit about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, so that's for those who aren't familiar with this. This is there technically is another state that has like this kind of universal rebate situation, but this is actually just as a tax credit, and it's around $100 per year. So it's much smaller than 750, not exactly basic income, but also it goes to each member of a household. So household of five gets $500, and the reasoning behind this is that there's a sales tax on food and grocery stores, and so they don't want to tax people into poverty. So then they calculate out that if they just make sure and rebate $100 to each person in Idaho, then that kind of cancels out their increase in grocery prices that they would pay. So yeah, I just think it's interesting to be able to communicate that too as being something that does rebate what people are spending on just taxes in general, but anything that they're paying in regards to taxes on whatever they consider to be basic needs.
Yeah, and particularly because Idaho is next to borders Oregon on the east side,
Right.
then like messaging in that area of the state on that, right? There's a lot of people commute between Idaho and Oregon for jobs and whatnot, and so then folks there would know folks in Idaho who Oregon voters in Eastern Oregon would know Idaho folks who get this rebate every year, and their grocery store hasn't closed, the world hasn't stopped spinning, and it's actually like helping them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Antonio, and I know this will make you uncomfortable because you're a humble dude, but I just remembered how we started off this conversation with news about San Antonio, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. And I was curious who Saint Antonio was.
Ha,
And
that's funny.
Saint Saint Anthony was, it says in Wikipedia here, he was known for several things, knowledge of scripture, but undying love and devotion to the poor and the sick. I'm wondering, are you a, Catholic kid? Were you named after this guy?
Oh wow.
Was that part of your upbringing?
Kind of. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Madrid, in Spain. So definitely raised Roman Catholic. Um, so there's several San Antonios. Mine is San Antonio de Padua, and
Hmm.
I'm not. This might be a different person. Forgive me. I'm super
No,
embarrassed.
this is the same one.
Oh, this is the same one. Okay. Well,
This is the same one.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
Often depicted holding a baby. Yeah,
Hmm.
perhaps.
Yeah, he's also known for like helping you find your spouse or something like that. But yeah, the
Okay. Well,
sick and the poor is high on his list.
okay. It's kind of amazing. Yeah. Definitely not a quality of mine to help people find their spouse, but
Oh, you've got time. You've got time.
we all have time.
Hey, that's one
But
impact of unconditional cash. It helps.
Do it
Yeah.
indirectly.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. One of our bootstrappers found a spouse because of their basic
There you go.
income. And I kid you not, it was a relationship that could not have happened. I don't want to give spoilers away till we're done with the series, but it was actually one of the things I like to talk about is the spillover effects of a basic income too. It was very meaningful to the people who knew the people getting a basic income, to the extent that two of them are now they're married. Um, so
that's amazing.
if you're working towards getting cash in people's pockets that they can do anything with, then you are in fact helping people find spouses. You are in fact helping people heal their bodies and their hearts, and you're helping with everything because you're just empowering them to do that for themselves.
Well, there we go. That's an amazing last word. Thank you so much.
San Antonio. I'm going to call you that from now on. Next time I see you at a conference, I'm like, hey, it's San Antonio.
Oh,
The people listening here don't know how much that's going to make Antonio blush. He's not that kind.
I'm already
He's
blushing.
not the kind of guy that likes.
Yeah, I know that
please don't. Thank you, but please don't.
I know Governor
Okay.
Jay Hammond in Alaska. I know is very well thought of for being the father of the dividend there in Alaska. So yeah, maybe you could end up being looked at as the saint of Oregon once this passes, and people look back and they're like, oh man, I love this. And there you go.
Now, nicknames can be fun if they're not too embarrassing. Like there was one guy when I was first getting into UBI, I was talking to everyone about it, and I was a bartender, and he started calling me C Note. He's like, my name's Conrad, but also C Note because he wants to give everyone $100, and he would just come in to the bar all the time. He's like, hey, C Note, and I was like, I like that nickname. That's great. I'll take it.
Well, it's important to I gotta say that it's important that sure I've worked, I think, pretty hard on the Oregon Rebate, and I'm still working on it. But yet this is not a thing about me in any way. It's like a million people are working on this thing, and I'm just like a humble person in a team member. This is not
Yeah,
an Antonio thing at all. This is a people thing.
that's what I like a lot about what you're doing here. Like there's certain political campaigns that are all derived around a personality, and those can go pretty far. And I give a lot of credit to Andrew Yang for like bringing awareness of the idea up. And a lot of times celebrity and razzmatazz is what gets people's attention. But really what UBI is about to me is about unlocking vast amounts of power by unlocking people on a broad scale. And what you guys have to do over, first of all, you're, like you said, you're not a celebrity. Nobody knows who you are. We go at conferences and nobody knows. And that's kind of like why I like to shout you out a little bit, is because what you're doing also requires getting hundreds of people to care and join you and collect signatures. There's nothing flash in the pan about, going out and standing in lines and collecting signatures for years of your life. So that week that you take off once you get enough signatures will be well earned, my friend.
Yeah, and
Thank you so much.
as we're here at the end here, Antonio, what would you like to let everyone know who's listening about how they can help with this in any way?
Thank you. Look at me being a bad organizer and not having a specific ask. I just want to be thankful for folks for sharing the space. We like to ask people two questions. One is what do you like to do and what are you good at doing? And if you feel like you want to do something, figure that out and reach out to me or the campaign. My email is not a secret, so it's antonio@oregonrebate.org or connect through social media. And together we can do this work, right? And so thank you. And if you are not involved in our campaign, totally cool, because I'm pretty sure that everybody here is involved in other stuff that is equally meaningful and equally impactful. So thank you for doing that other work too, right? It's an ecosystem of change, and we will only win when we all win. So there you go. Thank you.
It's a good note to end on. Thank you,
Nice.
Antonio. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you everyone who joined us to be a part of this and learn more about what's going on in Oregon. And next week we'll be back at our normal time at Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And thank you all so much for being a part of this. Thank you, Antonio.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio. And thanks, Peter, if you listen back to this part. Thanks for
Yes,
joining us
thank you.
too.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you all.